The doctor's words hung in the stale air of the tiny room above the mercantile like a death sentence, and Delilah Morrison felt her heart crack clean through. "Consumption," he said, shaking his head with that infuriating mixture of pity and professional detachment. "I give you maybe a year, perhaps less. You should write to your family back east, make arrangements. Nobody should die alone." But Delilah had no family. The cholera outbreak of 1875 had taken her parents and younger brother on the wagon train west, leaving her an 18-year-old orphan in Laramie, Wyoming territory, with nothing but a talent for sewing and a stubborn will to survive. Now, 3 years later in the spring of 1878, that survival had run its course. She had felt the sickness creeping into her lungs for months, the persistent cough that left her handkerchief spotted with blood, the night sweats that soaked through her thin nightgown, the weight falling off her already slender frame until her dresses hung like sacks. "I have been alone," she said quietly, standing from the examination table and smoothing down her skirts with trembling hands. "I suppose that is how I will finish." She paid the doctor his fee with coins she could not afford to spare and descended the narrow staircase to the street below. Laramie bustled with the chaos of late April. Cowboys driving cattle through the muddy thoroughfares, women in their bonnets hurrying between shops, the constant hammering of construction as the town continued its rapid growth around the Union Pacific Railroad. Delilah had sewn dresses and mended clothes for half these people, her nimble fingers keeping her fed and housed in a boarding establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Hendricks. Now even that simple work exhausted her, left her gasping for breath after an hour at her needle. She made her way slowly toward the boarding house, her lungs burning with each inhale of the spring air. A commotion near the general store caught her attention. A man stood beside a loaded pack horse, his broad back to her as he argued with the shopkeeper about the price of supplies. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall with shoulders that strained against his buckskin shirt. Dark hair fell past his collar, tied back carelessly with a leather cord. Even from behind, he radiated a raw power that seemed out of place among the townspeople. "I said $15 for the lot," the shopkeeper insisted, his voice rising. "That is my price. Take it or go elsewhere." "Your price was $12 last month," the mountain man replied, his voice a low rumble that carried despite its controlled volume. "Nothing has changed except your greed." Delilah should have kept walking, but something made her pause. Perhaps it was the unfairness of it, or perhaps she simply had nothing left to lose. "Mr. Patterson," she called out, her voice thin but clear. "I heard you quote Mr. Henderson $12 for the same supplies just yesterday." The shopkeeper's face reddened. "Miss Morrison, this does not concern you." "Honesty concerns everyone," she said, meeting his glare with calm determination. The effort of speaking made her cough, a racking spasm that doubled her over. When she straightened, blood flecked her lips. The mountain man had turned to face her, and she found herself looking into the most striking eyes she had ever seen, a pale gray like storm clouds over the mountains. His face was weathered and strong, with a thick beard that could not hide the sharp line of his jaw. He studied her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and somehow protected. "The lady speaks true?" he asked Patterson. The shopkeeper sputtered, but his guilt showed plain on his face. After a tense moment, he threw up his hands. "Fine, $12, but I will remember this." The mountain man counted out the coins without another word, loaded his supplies, and then turned his attention back to Delilah. She had begun walking away, suddenly self-conscious about her interference, but he caught up to her in 3 long strides. "I am obliged to you," he said, falling into step beside her. His pack horse followed docilely behind. "That is not a small sum you saved me." "It was nothing," Delilah said, then coughed again, pressing her handkerchief to her mouth. When she pulled it away, she saw him notice the fresh blood staining the white fabric. His eyes narrowed with concern rather than the disgust or fear she usually encountered. "That does not sound like nothing." He stopped walking, and she found herself stopping too, looking up at him. Up close, he was even more imposing, all muscle and masculine strength, but his expression held a gentleness that surprised her. "You are ill." "I am dying," she said bluntly. There seemed little point in prettying it up. "Consumption. The doctor says I have perhaps a year." Something flickered across his face, an emotion too quick to name. "I am sorry to hear that. My name is Samuel Morgan, though most call me Sam. Delilah Morrison." She offered a wan smile. "And you should not stand so close. They say it can spread." Sam did not move back an inch. "I have lived through blizzards, grisly attacks, and 3 different tribal wars. I figure if death wants me, it will have to work harder than a sickness." He paused, seeming to consider something. "Where are you headed?" "The boarding house, 2 streets over. I rent a room there." "I will walk with you." It was not a question, and Delilah found she did not mind the presumption. They walked in companionable silence, Sam adjusting his long stride to match her slower pace. People stared as they passed, unused to seeing the small seamstress in the company of such a man. Sam seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus entirely on her, one hand hovering near her elbow as if ready to catch her should she stumble. When they reached Mrs. Hendrick's establishment, Delilah turned to thank him, but he spoke first. "I am in town for 3 days, gathering supplies before I head back to my cabin in the Medicine Bow Range. May I call on you tomorrow?" The question caught her off guard. "Why would you want to do that?" "Because you helped me when you had no cause to, and because nobody should face what you are facing alone." His gray eyes held her steadily. "If you will permit it, I would like to know you better in whatever time there is." Delilah's throat tightened with an emotion she could not name. In 3 years in Laramie, no one had shown her such simple kindness. "I would like that," she whispered. Sam touched the brim of his hat. "Tomorrow, then, in the afternoon, we will take a walk if you are feeling up to it." She watched him lead his pack horse down the street toward the livery, his broad shoulders cutting an impressive figure among the ordinary townspeople. Mrs. Hendricks appeared at her elbow, eyes wide with curiosity. "Delilah Morrison, who in heaven's name was that?" "A mountain man named Samuel Morgan," Delilah said softly. "And I think perhaps he just changed what is left of my life." That night, Delilah lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling around her. For the first time since the doctor's pronouncement, she felt something other than resigned despair. It was a fragile thing, barely more than a flutter in her chest, but it felt remarkably like hope. The next afternoon arrived with unseasonable warmth, the Wyoming sun burning off the morning chill and turning the muddy streets into a sticky morass. Delilah chose her best dress, a dove-gray creation with modest lace at the collar that she had sewn herself, and pinned up her dark blonde hair with care. She looked pale and too thin in the mirror, purple shadows beneath her green eyes, but there was a flush of color in her cheeks that had been absent for weeks. Sam arrived precisely when he said he would, cleaned up from the day before but still unmistakably wild. His buckskin shirt had been replaced by a dark blue cotton one that emphasized his massive shoulders and arms. His hair was still tied back, revealing the strong bones of his face. He carried a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "I brought you something," he said without preamble, holding it out. Delilah took it carefully, feeling the weight of it. Inside was a beautifully carved wooden box, the lid decorated with an intricate pattern of pine branches. When she opened it, the sweet scent of dried herbs filled the air. "What is this?" "Echinacea, elderberry, and some other plants the Shoshone taught me about," Sam explained, his voice gruff as if embarrassed by the gesture. "They are supposed to help with lung ailments. I cannot promise they will cure you, but they might ease the symptoms, give you more good days than bad ones." Tears pricked Delilah's eyes. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me." Sam was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. "I lost my wife and infant daughter to mountain fever 5 years ago," he said finally. "I sat beside Sarah for 3 days while she burned up with it, and there was nothing I could do. The baby, little Margaret, she only lived 2 weeks. When they died, I thought I would die too, wished for it most days. I went up into the mountains and I stayed there, away from people, away from anything that could hurt like that again." He paused, his jaw working as if the words were physically difficult to speak. "But yesterday, when I saw you stand up to that shopkeeper despite being sick, despite having nothing to gain from it, I saw something I had not seen in a long time. Courage, spirit, the kind of strength that has nothing to do with muscles or guns. And when you said you would die alone, I thought about Sarah dying in our cabin with only me there, and how even with me beside her, she looked so lonely at the end. I thought if I could keep that from happening to another soul, maybe there would be some purpose to all this living I am still doing." Delilah's tears fell freely now. She reached out and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his calloused palm. "I am sorry for your loss. That is a grief I cannot imagine." Sam's hand tightened gently around hers. "And I am sorry for yours. Shall we walk?" They walked to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie, vast and golden under the afternoon sun. The Medicine Bow Range rose in the distance, still capped with snow despite the spring warmth. Sam talked about his life in the mountains, about the cabin he had built with his own hands, about tracking elk and wolves through the high country, about the crystalline silence of winter snowfalls, and the riot of wildflowers that carpeted the meadows each summer. Delilah listened, enthralled by this glimpse into a world so different from her own. "It sounds beautiful," she said wistfully. "I have never been beyond Laramie since the wagon train brought me here." "Would you like to see it?" Sam asked suddenly. "My cabin, I mean. The mountain air might do you good, better than this dusty town. And the herbs I gave you, they grow wild up there. Fresh, they are even more potent." "I could not impose like that," Delilah protested, though her heart leaped at the thought. "It would not be an imposition. I have plenty of room and I know how to keep things proper. I built a small guest cabin last year for when my trapping partner visits. You could stay there, have your privacy." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I know this is forward and you have no reason to trust me. But I meant what I said yesterday. Nobody should face death alone, and if there is a chance that the mountains could give you more time, even a little more comfort, I would like to offer that." Delilah looked up at this massive, gentle man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to form. "What would people say? When have you ever cared about that?" Sam asked, and despite the gravity of the conversation, she found herself smiling. "You barely know me, and yet you see me clearly. I would like to know you better. Whatever time there is, I would like to spend it knowing Delilah Morrison." The sincerity in his voice left no room for doubt. She made her decision in a heartbeat. "Yes, I will come." Sam's face transformed with a smile that made him look years younger. "Truly, truly. I need a few days to settle my affairs, give Mrs. Hendricks notice, finish the sewing projects I have promised to people. But then, yes, I will come to the mountains with you." They walked back to town making plans, their hands brushing together with increasing frequency until finally Sam took hers and held it openly. His palm was warm and rough against hers, and Delilah felt safer than she had in years. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Hendricks clucked and worried but ultimately supported Delilah's decision, especially after Sam came by and spoke with her privately for nearly an hour. Whatever he said must have been persuasive, because the boarding house owner became one of their staunchest defenders when the town gossips began their predictable chatter. Delilah finished her sewing obligations and sold most of her belongings, keeping only her most precious items and practical clothing. Sam helped her purchase supplies appropriate for mountain living, patient and knowledgeable as he guided her through decisions about everything from sturdy boots to warm blankets. He treated her with unfailing courtesy, never presuming on her time or affection, but his gray eyes tracked her constantly, as if he could not quite believe she was real. On the morning of their departure, Delilah woke before dawn with a mixture of excitement and trepidation churning in her stomach. She dressed in her new practical clothes, dark wool pants and a simple cotton shirt under a warm jacket, and braided her hair down her back. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like someone preparing for an adventure rather than someone dying. Sam arrived with 2 horses, his own massive stallion and a gentle mare he had purchased specifically for her. "This is Rosie," he said, stroking the mare's nose. "She has the sweetest temperament of any horse I have ever known. She will take good care of you." Learning to ride took most of the first day. Sam was an excellent teacher, patient and encouraging, never making her feel foolish when she struggled with the unfamiliar movements. By the time they stopped to make camp that evening, Delilah's legs ached and her lungs burned from the exertion, but she felt more alive than she had in months. Sam set up camp with efficient movements, clearly a routine he had performed countless times. He built a fire, cooked a simple but delicious meal of beans and cornbread, and brewed tea from the herbs he had given her. As the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, they sat by the fire and talked. "Tell me about your life before Laramie," Sam said, his voice gentle in the gathering darkness. So Delilah told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, about her father's dreams of western land and opportunity, about her mother's quiet strength and her brother's mischievous laughter. She spoke of the wagon train and the hope that had carried them across the plains, and the horror of watching cholera tear through their company like a scythe through wheat. She described holding her mother's hand as she died, trying to comfort 10-year-old Timothy as he succumbed to the same fever, watching her father give up and simply stop fighting. "I was so angry," she whispered, staring into the flames. "Angry at them for dying, angry at myself for surviving, angry at God for allowing it. For a long time I thought that anger was all that was keeping me alive, and then even that faded and I was just going through the motions. Waking up, sewing, eating, sleeping. Existing but not really living." Sam reached across the space between them and took her hand. "And now I feel like I am waking up from a long sleep. Even with death ahead of me, I feel more alive than I have in 3 years." She turned to look at him, his face half illuminated by firelight, strong and solid and real. "Thank you for that. You are giving me something too," Sam said quietly. "A reason to come back down from the mountains, a reminder that life is more than just survival and solitude." They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, watching the fire burn down to embers. When Sam finally banked the flames and showed her to the small tent he had pitched for her, Delilah felt a pang of reluctance to leave his presence. She slept better that night, on the hard ground beneath canvas, than she had in months in her boarding house bed. The journey took 4 more days of steady riding through increasingly rugged terrain. Sam set a pace that accommodated Delilah's limitations without making her feel weak, stopping frequently for rest and making sure she drank her herbal tea regularly. Each night they camped under the stars, and each night their conversations went deeper, weaving the threads of their lives together. Sam spoke more about Sarah, about their courtship in Missouri and their journey west seeking a fresh start. He described her laugh and her terrible cooking and the way she sang hymns while doing chores. He talked about the devastation of her death without flinching from the pain of it, and Delilah understood that he was trusting her with pieces of himself he had kept locked away for 5 years. In turn, she shared her own fears and regrets, her anger at a life cut short before it had truly begun, her grief over dreams that would never be realized. "I wanted children," she admitted one night, her voice thick with emotion. "A husband, a home, a family of my own. I wanted to grow old and watch grandchildren play. Instead, I got 3 years of loneliness and now this death sentence." "You are not dead yet," Sam said firmly, "and I intend to make sure that whatever time you have left is filled with more than loneliness." On the 5th day, they climbed into true mountain country, and Delilah gasped at the beauty surrounding them. Towering pines reached toward an impossibly blue sky, their scent sharp and clean. Streams rushed over rocks, their water so clear she could see every pebble on the bottom. Wildflowers dotted the meadows they passed through, and the air itself tasted different, crisp and pure. "We are close," Sam said, and she heard the note of pride in his voice. "Just over this ridge." When they crested the rise and Delilah saw Sam's cabin for the first time, she felt tears spring to her eyes. It sat in a sheltered valley, built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. The smaller guest cabin stood about 50 yards away, offering privacy while still being close. Behind the structures, the Medicine Bow peaks rose in jagged splendor, and before them a meadow stretched, lush and green with spring growth. A creek burbled past, and she could see the remains of a vegetable garden waiting to be replanted. "Sam, it is beautiful," she breathed. He looked pleased, a faint flush coloring his weathered cheeks. "It is home. Come, let me show you around." The main cabin was meticulously organized, everything in its place but with touches that spoke of the man who lived there. Books lined a shelf near the fireplace, surprising Delilah with their number and variety. Cooking implements hung from hooks, well used and cared for. A large bed dominated one corner, covered in furs and woven blankets. The guest cabin was smaller but equally well appointed, with a comfortable bed, a small stove, and a window that looked out on the mountains. "I will start a fire for you and bring in your things," Sam said. "You must be exhausted. Rest, and I will prepare dinner." But Delilah did not want to rest. Despite the long journey, she felt energized, her lungs breathing easier in the mountain air. "May I help you? I am not much of a cook, but I can learn." Sam's smile was answer enough. They worked together to prepare the evening meal, moving around each other in the small space with surprising ease. He showed her where everything was kept, explained his systems for water and firewood and food storage. His hands brushed hers as he demonstrated how to work the cast iron stove, and each touch sent warmth spreading through her chest. Over dinner, Sam grew serious. "I need to be clear about something, Delilah. You are here as my guest, not as an obligation or a burden. If you ever want to return to Laramie, I will take you, no questions asked. And if you prefer more distance, more privacy, I will respect that absolutely. But I hope you will let me spend time with you, let me show you the mountains I love. Let me know you, truly know you." "I would like that very much," Delilah said softly. "I would like all of that." As spring gave way to early summer, a routine developed that felt as natural as breathing. Delilah woke each morning to the sound of Sam chopping wood or tending to the horses, and she would emerge from her cabin to find fresh water waiting and often a handful of wildflowers left on her doorstep. They ate breakfast together. Then Sam would guide her on gentle explorations of the surrounding area. He showed her a waterfall that tumbled down the mountainside in a cascade of white foam, the spray creating rainbows in the morning sunlight. He taught her to identify edible plants and medicinal herbs, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he demonstrated proper harvesting techniques. He introduced her to the rhythms of mountain life, the work of maintaining a homestead in the wilderness. Delilah helped where she could, her strength slowly increasing under Sam's care. She replanted the vegetable garden, tended the chickens Sam kept in a small coop, learned to bake bread in the temperamental stove. On days when her cough was bad and exhaustion pulled at her, Sam would simply sit with her, reading aloud from his books or telling stories of his trapping adventures. But mostly they talked. Endless conversations about everything and nothing, weaving intimacy from shared thoughts and laughter. Sam spoke of his childhood in Kentucky, of learning to trap from his father and grandfather, of the wanderlust that had driven him ever westward. Delilah described her love of sewing, the satisfaction of creating beauty from fabric and thread, and Sam listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he truly heard her. On a warm afternoon in late June, Sam took her to his favorite spot, a high meadow where the wildflowers grew so thick they looked like a painted carpet. They spread a blanket and sat surrounded by blue columbine and red paintbrush and yellow sunflowers, the mountain peaks framing them on all sides. "I have never seen anything so lovely," Delilah said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "Neither have I," Sam said, but when she looked at him, he was watching her, not the scenery. The intensity in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "Sam," she whispered. He moved closer, his large hand coming up to cup her cheek with heartbreaking tenderness. "I know I said I only wanted to keep you company to make sure you were not alone. But Delilah, somewhere along the way, that changed. You have become so much more to me than I ever expected. I am falling in love with you, and I need you to know that, even if it complicates things." Delilah leaned into his touch, her eyes falling closed. "It does not complicate anything. It makes everything simpler, because I am falling in love with you too." Sam's other hand came up to frame her face, and he leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When their lips finally met, it was gentle and sweet and filled with all the words they had not yet said. Delilah's hands found their way to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her palms, and she poured everything she felt into that kiss. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "I cannot lose someone else I love," he said hoarsely. "I cannot do that again." "Then we will fight," Delilah said fiercely. "I am not ready to give up yet, not when I have finally found something worth living for." From that day forward, everything changed and nothing changed. They were still careful of proprieties, Delilah keeping her own cabin, but the emotional distance between them vanished entirely. Sam held her hand as they walked, kissed her with increasing passion when they were alone, spoke of a future with cautious hope. Delilah's health remained precarious. Good days were interspersed with bad ones where the cough racked her body and weakness left her confined to bed. But under Sam's devoted care, there were more good days than bad. The mountain air, the herbs, the simple joy of being loved and cared for all worked together to keep the consumption at bay. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch of the main cabin watching the sunset paint the sky, Sam pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket. "I want to show you something." Inside was a ring, simple gold with a small blue stone. "This was Sarah's," he said quietly. "Her grandmother's before that. After she died, I could not bear to look at it, so I put it away." He turned to face Delilah fully, taking her hand. "I loved Sarah with everything I had. Her death broke me in ways I thought could never be healed. But you have shown me that a heart can mend, that love is not a finite resource that runs out. I will always carry Sarah and Margaret with me, but there is room in my heart for you too. So much room." Tears streamed down Delilah's face as Sam continued. "I know the circumstances are not traditional. I know you are sick and the future is uncertain. But I love you, Delilah Morrison, and I want whatever time we have to be spent as husband and wife. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Delilah said without hesitation. "Yes, Sam, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. They kissed as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, and Delilah felt something settle in her chest, a rightness that transcended her illness and fear. They were married 2 weeks later in Laramie, with Mrs. Hendricks and the local reverend as witnesses. Delilah wore a new dress she had sewn for the occasion, pale blue to match her eyes, and Sam wore a proper suit that emphasized his powerful build. When the reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Sam kissed her with such tenderness that even the stoic reverend looked misty-eyed. The journey back to the cabin felt different, charged with new promise. That night, in the main cabin that was now their shared home, Sam made love to her with exquisite gentleness, his large hands reverent on her skin, his voice murmuring words of love and devotion. Delilah had feared she would never know this intimacy, this profound joining of bodies and souls, and the gift of it overwhelmed her. "I love you," she whispered against his chest as they lay tangled together afterward. "I love you so much, Sam." His arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Delilah Morgan. For whatever time we have, you are mine and I am yours." Summer mellowed into autumn, and against all expectations, Delilah continued to improve. The persistent cough that had plagued her for months diminished to an occasional irritation. Her strength increased, allowing her to work beside Sam for hours without collapsing in exhaustion. Color returned to her cheeks, and the hollow angles of near starvation filled out with healthy curves. "I do not understand it," she said one October morning as she helped Sam stack firewood for the coming winter. "I should be worse, not better. The doctor said a year at most, and it has been 6 months. Sam straightened from his work, his gray eyes warm as they traveled over her. "Maybe you just needed a reason to fight. Maybe the mountains are healing you like I hoped they would, or maybe doctors do not know everything." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I am just grateful for every day I get with you." The first snow came in November, transforming their valley into a wonderland of white. Sam had prepared meticulously for winter, and they had more than enough supplies to last until spring. The enforced closeness of being snowed in only deepened their bond. They spent long evenings by the fire, Sam reading aloud while Delilah sewed, or simply talking and making love and being together. On a frigid December night, Delilah woke to find Sam awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. "What troubles you?" she asked, snuggling closer to his warmth. "I keep waiting for it to end," he admitted quietly. "For you to get worse, for the consumption to take you from me. I am terrified every time you cough, every time you seem tired. I know I should just be grateful for what we have, but I am so afraid of losing you." Delilah propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the dim light from the banked fire. "I have been thinking about that, about what the doctor said and what has happened since. Sam, I think he was wrong." I think I was dying in Laramie, in that dusty town with no hope and no reason to keep fighting. But here, with you, with fresh air and good food and love, I think I am healing. The cough is nearly gone. I can work all day without exhaustion. I feel strong. You think the consumption is gone?" Sam's voice held desperate hope. "I think maybe it is, or if not gone entirely, then held at bay enough that I might live a normal life." She leaned down and kissed him softly. "I think you saved me, Sam Morgan, not just from dying alone, but from dying at all." Sam pulled her down against his chest, his heart pounding beneath her ear. "If that is true, if you are truly healing, then you have saved me right back. I was dead inside when I met you, just a body going through the motions. You brought me back to life." Winter passed in cozy domesticity. They celebrated Christmas with a modest feast and gifts they had made for each other. Sam carved her an intricate jewelry box from pine, every surface decorated with delicate flowers. Delilah sewed him a new shirt in soft wool, dyed deep blue to match his eyes, every stitch placed with love. In January, Delilah realized her monthly courses had not come. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, but when February passed without them either, she could no longer deny the possibility. One morning while Sam was outside tending the horses, she stood before the mirror and placed a hand on her belly. It was still flat, but she thought perhaps there was the slightest curve where none had been before. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, she gathered her courage. "Sam, I need to tell you something." He looked up from the vegetables he was chopping, immediately attentive. "What is it? Are you feeling unwell?" "No, I feel wonderful actually, better than I have in over a year." She took a deep breath. "Sam, I think I am pregnant." The knife clattered to the cutting board. Sam stared at her, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and then radiant joy. "Pregnant? You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor. My courses have stopped and I have been feeling different. Tired in a new way, and my breasts are tender." She pressed a hand to her stomach. "I think there is a baby, our baby." Sam crossed the cabin in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "A baby," he breathed, setting her down gently and dropping to his knees before her. He pressed his face against her belly, his arms wrapping around her hips. "A baby." Delilah ran her fingers through his long hair, her own eyes wet with tears. "I know it is risky. I know the consumption could come back, that pregnancy might be too much for my body. But Sam, I want this. I want your child." He looked up at her, his gray eyes fierce. "Then we will have this child and you will both be fine. I will not lose you, Delilah. I will not lose another family. We will fight with everything we have." As winter gave way to spring and Delilah's belly grew, Sam became almost comically protective. He refused to let her do anything strenuous, hovering constantly until she had to banish him from the cabin just to have space to breathe. But his devotion touched her deeply, this evidence of how much he loved her, how desperately he wanted both her and their child to survive. The pregnancy was easier than Delilah had dared hope. The nausea of the first months passed, and she bloomed in the mountain summer. Her body, which had been so ravaged by consumption, now thrived with new life. The cough disappeared entirely, and her energy was boundless. Dr. Thornton, summoned from Laramie in the 6th month to examine her, could barely believe she was the same woman he had pronounced terminal. "I have never seen anything like it," he admitted, shaking his head in wonder. "The consumption has gone into remission, perhaps permanently. Your lungs sound clear, your heart is strong. You are the picture of health, Mrs. Morgan." After the doctor left, Sam held her for a long time, his face buried in her hair. "You are going to be fine," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are both going to be fine." "I told you," Delilah said, smiling through her own tears. You saved me." Labor came on a warm September evening, exactly 1 year after Sam had first brought her to the mountains. Sam had arranged for Mrs. Hendricks to come stay with them for the last month of the pregnancy. The older woman delighted to help. As the pains intensified through the night, Sam refused to leave Delilah's side, holding her hand and murmuring encouragement, his face pale but determined. "I cannot do this," Delilah gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. "It hurts too much." "Yes, you can," Sam said fiercely, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. "You survived consumption, you survived losing your family, you survived 3 years alone in a strange town. You are the strongest person I know, and you can do this." Dawn was breaking over the mountains when Delilah finally gave one last desperate push and felt her child slide free. A baby's cry split the air, lusty and strong, and Mrs. Hendricks laughed with joy. "A boy," she announced, wrapping the infant in soft blankets. "A fine, healthy boy." Sam's face transformed with wonder as Mrs. Hendricks placed the baby in Delilah's arms. He was perfect, with a thatch of dark hair and his father's gray eyes already trying to focus on her face. Delilah felt her heart crack open with love so fierce it hurt. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mama and this is your papa, and we love you so much." Sam reached out a tentative finger to stroke his son's cheek, his hand trembling. "He is perfect. You are perfect." He looked at Delilah with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Thank you. Thank you for fighting, for living, for giving me this." They named him Thomas Samuel Morgan, after Sam's father. Tommy thrived from his first breath, nursing eagerly and growing like a weed. Sam proved to be a devoted father, endlessly patient with the baby's demands. Delilah often woke in the night to find him sitting in the rocking chair he had built, Tommy cradled against his massive chest, both of them sleeping peacefully. The first year of Tommy's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and profound joy. Delilah remained healthy, her body recovering from childbirth with remarkable speed. The consumption stayed away, as if her body had decided that it had better things to do than be sick. Sam built an addition onto the cabin to give them more space, and Delilah filled it with curtains and rugs, and all the homey touches that turned a house into a home. One evening in late autumn, when Tommy was just over a year old and taking his first wobbly steps, Delilah stood on the porch watching Sam play with their son in the yard. The sight of that huge man on his hands and knees, making animal noises to Tommy's delighted giggles, filled her with such happiness she could barely contain it. Sam looked up and caught her watching, his face breaking into that smile that still made her heart skip. He scooped Tommy up and came to join her, wrapping one arm around her waist while he held their son with the other. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I am thinking about the doctor telling me I would die alone," Delilah said softly. "I am thinking about how certain I was that my life was over, that I would never have any of this." She looked up at him, her eyes bright. "And then you came along and vowed to be beside me. You gave me everything I thought I would never have." Sam's arm tightened around her. "You gave me just as much. You brought me back from the dead, Delilah. You and Tommy, you are my whole world." "I know I was supposed to die," she continued, her voice wondering. "The doctor was so certain, but I did not die, Sam. I lived. We both lived, and we built this beautiful life together." "You did not die because you found something to live for," Sam said firmly. "Because you are strong and stubborn and refuse to give up. Because the mountains healed you and love healed you and you decided to fight." Tommy squirmed in his father's arms, reaching for Delilah, and she took him, breathing in his sweet baby smell. "Do you think we will have more?" she asked. "More children?" "Do you want more?" Sam asked carefully. "I do." I want to fill this cabin with babies, give Tommy brothers and sisters, build a real family. She met his eyes. If you want that too. Sam's answer was a kiss, deep and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, he grinned. I want that more than anything. I want to spend the next 50 years with you, Delilah Morgan, raising babies and growing old and loving each other. 50 years, she teased. Only 50, fine, 60 then. 70. However long we get, it will not be enough. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Margaret after Sam's first family, arrived 2 years later. She had Delilah's blonde hair and green eyes, and from the moment she drew breath, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Sam was equally devoted to both his children, but there was something especially tender about watching him with Sarah, healing old wounds as he gave this daughter the life his first Margaret had never gotten to live. Tommy adored his baby sister, following his parents around and trying to help with every aspect of her care. At 3 years old, he was already showing signs of inheriting his father's size and strength, a sturdy boy with boundless energy and his mother's kind heart. Life in the mountains was not always easy. Winters were harsh, summers brought the threat of wildfires, and the isolation could be challenging. But Sam and Delilah faced everything together, their partnership strengthened by all they had overcome. They built a life based on love and hard work and mutual respect, and they were happy. When Sarah was 2 and Delilah discovered she was pregnant again, Sam worried despite her excellent health. 3 children, he said, running a hand through his hair. Are you certain you are up for this? I have never been more certain of anything, Delilah assured him. My body is strong, Sam. The consumption is gone, truly gone. Dr. Thornton said so himself during his last visit. I can do this. This pregnancy was the easiest yet, and when labor started on a crisp October evening, it was quick and straightforward. Their third child, another son they named Daniel, arrived with minimal fuss and maximum vigor. He had his mother's green eyes and a full head of red gold hair that came from neither parent, causing much speculation about some distant relative. With 3 children under 5, the cabin was chaotic and loud and filled with laughter. Sam built yet another addition, giving each child their own small room, and Delilah sewed endless clothes and mended endless tears. Tommy started learning to read from Sam's books. Sarah showed an early talent for music and could hum any tune she heard. And Danny was placid and cheerful, content to observe his siblings' antics. One winter evening, when the children were finally asleep, and Sam and Delilah sat by the fire in rare quiet, she looked over at her husband. Gray was starting to thread through his dark hair, and the lines around his eyes had deepened. But to her, he was more handsome than ever. I have been thinking, she said, setting aside her mending. About what? Sam asked, looking up from the leather tack he was repairing. About that day in Laramie when you said nobody should die alone. Do you remember? I remember everything about that day. His gray eyes were soft in the firelight. You vowed to be beside me until your very last breath. You said you would not let me face death alone. Delilah smiled. Instead, you gave me so much life that I forgot about dying entirely. You gave me a reason to live, and then you gave me more reasons than I could count. Sam set aside his work and came to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his much larger ones. You did the same for me, Delilah. When we met, I was already dead inside. I was just waiting for my body to catch up. You brought me back to life, gave me a reason to come down from the mountain and be part of the world again. We saved each other, Delilah said softly. We did, Sam agreed. He pulled her down for a kiss, still sweet after nearly 6 years of marriage. And I intend to keep saving you, every day for the rest of our lives. The years flowed by like the creek that ran past their cabin, steady and strong. Tommy grew into a strapping youth who idolized his father and learned everything Sam could teach about trapping and tracking and living off the land. Sarah became a beauty, quick-witted and kind, with her father's strength wrapped in her mother's grace. Danny grew more slowly but with quiet determination, a thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. When Tommy was 12 and already nearly as tall as his father, Delilah announced she was pregnant again. Sam worried more this time, worried about her age and the demands of another pregnancy, but Delilah remained serene and confident. At 32, she was still in excellent health, the consumption nothing but a distant memory. Their fourth child, a daughter named Margaret Rose, arrived on a warm spring day, welcomed enthusiastically by her older siblings. She had dark hair like her father and brothers but gray-green eyes that were entirely her own. Sam held her with the ease of an experienced father but the wonder of a man who never took these gifts for granted. 4 healthy children, he marveled, looking down at tiny Maggie. I never dared dream of this. Neither did I, Delilah said, exhausted but glowing. I thought I would die at 21 without ever knowing love or family. Instead, I have had all of this. I have lived 1,000 lives worth of happiness in the years with you. We are not done yet, Sam said with a grin. We still have at least 30 or 40 years left to add to that happiness. He was right. The years continued to unfold, bringing challenges and joys in equal measure. A hard winter when they nearly lost the livestock and Tommy, at 15, proved himself a man by helping his father keep everything alive. Sarah's courtship at 17 with a young rancher from a neighboring valley, Sam's fierce protectiveness mellowing into acceptance when he saw how the young man looked at his daughter. Danny's decision at 16 to become a teacher, returning from a season at a school in Laramie with books and big dreams. Maggie's wild streak that kept them all on their toes and reminded Sam so much of Delilah's stubborn courage. Through it all, Sam and Delilah's love remained the foundation everything else was built on. They still made time for each other, stolen moments alone despite the demands of children and homesteading. They still talked late into the night, still laughed at private jokes, still reached for each other first thing in the morning and last thing at night. One autumn evening, when Tommy was 20 and making plans to start his own homestead deeper in the mountains, when Sarah was 18 and newly married, when Danny was preparing to leave for teaching college in the spring, and Maggie was a gangly 14-year-old all elbows and attitude, Sam and Delilah took a rare walk alone to the high meadow where he had first told her he loved her. The wildflowers were long since gone, replaced by the gold and red of autumn grasses, but the view was still spectacular. They stood at the edge of the meadow, Sam's arm around Delilah's waist, both of them surveying the sweep of mountains and sky. 16 years, Delilah said wonderingly. 16 years since you brought me here to die, and here I am, more alive than ever. You never came here to die, Sam corrected gently. You came here to live, you just did not know it yet. No, I suppose I did not. She turned in his arms to face him fully. His hair was now fully gray, his face more lined, but those gray eyes were still as sharp and clear as the day they met. I love you, Sam Morgan. I have loved you since that first walk in Laramie when you held my hand and made me feel safe for the first time in years. And I have loved you since you stood up to that cheating shopkeeper, despite being too sick to stand straight, Sam replied. I looked at you and saw courage and spirit, and everything I thought had died with Sarah. You showed me that love is not a finite resource, that hearts can hold more than we think possible. They kissed as the sun began to set, and it was the kiss of longtime lovers, familiar and comfortable and still charged with the passion that had never dimmed between them. When they finally pulled apart, both smiling, Sam rested his forehead against hers. "I vowed to be beside you until my very last breath," he said softly. "I intend to keep that vow, but Delilah, I think we are going to have a lot more breaths than anyone expected." "Good," Delilah said firmly, "because I am not nearly done with you yet. We have grandchildren to spoil, more years to fill with memories, a whole lifetime still ahead of us." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand as darkness fell, the lights in the windows welcoming them home. Inside, their children would be waiting, noisy and demanding and wonderful. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own joys, its own moments of grace. But tonight, they had each other, and the knowledge that they had beaten death and built a life richer than any they had dared imagine. The years continued their steady march forward. True to Sam's prediction, they did indeed spoil grandchildren, first Sarah's robust twin boys, then Tommy's 3 daughters, and eventually even Danny and his schoolteacher wife added 2 more to the growing Morgan clan. Maggie, independent as always, waited longer to marry, but when she did at 24, it was to a man who matched her wild spirit and loved her fiercely. Sam and Delilah grew old together in their mountain cabin, their love deepening with each passing season. Sam's body, so strong for so many years, finally began to show his age, his movements slower and his joints stiff on cold mornings. But his mind remained sharp, and his devotion to Delilah never wavered. Delilah too aged, her golden hair turning silver, her face creasing with laugh lines and the marks of a life well lived. The consumption never returned, that death sentence from a Laramie doctor proven spectacularly wrong. She remained healthy and active well into her 60s, still keeping house and tending her garden and spoiling her numerous grandchildren. On a summer evening when they were both in their mid-70s, Sam and Delilah sat on the porch they had repaired and rebuilt a dozen times over the decades. Their children were grown with families of their own, though Tommy had built his homestead close enough that they saw him often. The sun was setting over the same mountains that had witnessed their entire life together, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and gold. "You ever regret it?" Delilah asked suddenly, her hand in Sam's as it had been countless times before. "Leaving your solitude to take care of a dying woman." Sam turned to look at her, his gray eyes still clear despite his age. "Regret meeting you, regret loving you, never, not for a single moment." "You gave me everything, Delilah. You gave me back my life." "And you gave me mine," she replied softly. "The doctor said I would die alone, and I believed him. I had accepted it, but you refused to let that happen. You vowed to stay beside me, and you have, every day for more than 50 years. 52 years next month," Sam said with satisfaction. 52 years of marriage, 56 years since the day I first saw you stand up for what was right, despite being too weak to stand. Best decision I ever made, following you to that boarding house." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had watched over them for decades. The sounds of the mountain night rose around them, familiar and beloved. An owl called from the pines. The creek murmured its eternal song. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. "I am not afraid anymore," Delilah said eventually. "Of dying, I mean. When it comes, whenever it comes, I will not be alone. I will have you beside me, just as you promised." "Always," Sam vowed, his voice still strong despite his years. "Until my very last breath, I will be beside you." "That is a promise I intend to keep." More years passed, precious and increasingly finite. They celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The cabin was bursting with family. loud with laughter and love, and Sam and Delilah sat at the center of it all, the root from which this whole beautiful tree had grown. When Delilah fell ill the winter she turned 78, it was not the consumption returning but simply the wearing down of a body that had lived long and well. She took to her bed in the cabin where she had spent so many happy years, and Sam rarely left her side. He held her hand, read to her from their favorite books, told her stories of their life together. "I am not afraid," she repeated, her voice thin but steady. "How can I be when I am surrounded by so much love?" Sam leaned down and kissed her forehead, his eyes wet. "You were never supposed to make it past 21. You gave us 57 extra years, Delilah. 57 years of joy and love and family. That is a miracle." "You are my miracle," she whispered. "You saved me, Sam Morgan. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." She slipped away peacefully in her sleep 3 nights later, Sam's hand in hers, their children gathered around. Her last breath was quiet, and the smile on her face suggested she was at peace, ready for whatever came next. Sam grieved, but it was not the devastating, life-ending grief he had experienced when Sarah died. This was a softer sorrow, tempered by gratitude for the years they had shared, and the knowledge that they had loved each other fully and well. He stayed in the cabin, cared for by his children but stubbornly independent, and spent his days remembering and being grateful. He only lived 6 months after Delilah's passing. Tommy found him one spring morning sitting in his chair on the porch, looking out at the mountains he had loved, a letter to Delilah clutched in his hand. He had gone peacefully, the doctor said, his heart simply stopping after a life fully lived. They buried Sam beside Delilah in the small family cemetery on the hillside above the cabin, their graves marked by simple stones carved with their names and the dates that bracketed their lives. And carved beneath, added by Tommy with his own hands, were the words that told their story. She was told she would die alone. He vowed to be beside her until his very last breath. Together they lived. The cabin remained in the Morgan family for generations, maintained by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all knew the story of Sam and Delilah. It became a family legend, this tale of love that conquered death, of 2 broken souls who found each other and built something beautiful from their shared healing. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the pines and the creek sang its eternal song, those who visited the old cabin swore they could feel the presence of that love still, as enduring as the mountains themselves, a testament to the truth that some promises are kept beyond the grave, and some love stories never truly end.